I'm with a real man now, she sneered. But as her new world came crashing down, she learned the hard way: loyalty and strength come in forms she never understood. An amazing story happened to me. Do you want to know how it all ended? In my younger years, I was no stranger to grit and grease. Working for my uncle was tough, but it taught me everything I needed to know about cars and about life. I was just 18 when I started, spending long days and nights hunched over engines, my hands chafed and stained with oil. The work was relentless, every bolt turned and wrench lifted another step toward my goal. My uncle's shop wasn't some air-conditioned office, it was a place where hard labor and elbow grease were the real currency. I saved every dollar, sacrificing sleep, weekends, and any kind of social life to make sure that one day I'd have my own garage. I could picture it in my mind, a place that was truly mine, built from the ground up, where I'd fix cars and maybe build a life around it. 7 years later, through every scraped knuckle and late-night shift, I had enough saved to make that vision real. I opened my garage, and seeing my own sign above the door for the first time was one of the proudest moments of my life. Then came Jenny, a chance meeting at an auto show that changed everything. She was something else, smart, determined, with a smile that caught me off guard in a way nothing else had. I felt a jolt, an instant connection. We started talking and swapped numbers, and even though we lived miles apart, we kept in touch. I'd never been much of a phone guy, but I found myself looking forward to every call, hanging on to every word. A few months later, we finally got together, and I knew I was falling for her. Then, tragedy hit her life. Her parents passed unexpectedly, leaving her heartbroken and her college dreams hanging by a thread. Seeing her struggle felt like a punch to the gut. I knew I had to do something. So I dipped into my savings, the same money I'd scraped together with years of work, and handed it over to help her stay in school. She cried when I gave it to her, hugging me as if she couldn't believe anyone would do that for her. But for me, it was simple. I believed in her, in us, and in the life we could build together. Helping Jenny get through college wasn't just about her education, it was about investing in our future. Every dollar I handed over was a choice I made with pride. As the years went by, things began to change in ways I couldn't ignore. Once our kids had moved out, I figured Jenny and I would settle back into a new rhythm, just the two of us. But instead of the warmth and closeness I'd hoped for, Jenny felt more like a stranger in my own home. She'd recently started working at a new law firm, one of those high-end places downtown. The job came with a flashy new salary, long hours, and the glitz that I knew made her feel more sophisticated. At first, I was proud of her, happy to see her success. But as she kept working late, barely looking at me when she got home, something didn't sit right. It started with small things. She'd take hours to respond to a simple text, or she'd say she was working late again, but come home with the faint smell of cologne that wasn't hers. I tried to brush it off. After all, I knew the value of hard work and assumed she was just committed to making a name for herself. But the overtime hours kept piling up, and I'd go to bed alone more nights than I cared to count. I found myself wondering who this woman beside me was turning into, someone distant, almost cold. The suspicion gnawed at me, and one night, I finally faced her. I sat her down, calm on the outside but churning on the inside, and asked her, straight up, if there was something going on. I didn't raise my voice or accuse, I just wanted the truth. For a moment, I thought she'd deny it, maybe laugh it off. But then her face fell, and she looked away, like she couldn't bear to meet my eyes. After what felt like an eternity, she admitted it. She told me she was seeing someone else, her boss, John. My stomach dropped. All those late nights, the coldness, the distance, it all made sense in the worst possible way. She didn't even try to soften the blow, telling me she'd wanted someone better, someone who matched her new life. She called him an alpha, a man who could take charge, unlike me, the guy who had supposedly settled and never improved himself. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The betrayal hit like a freight train, every word stripping away the years we built together. I thought of everything I'd done, every sacrifice I'd made, the nights I'd stayed up fixing cars to build our life and put our kids through college. I thought of the years she'd leaned on me, and how I'd held her up when she'd needed it most. And now, because I wasn't polished enough, because I didn't fit into her new, glitzy world, she was ready to toss it all away. My heart felt like it was being torn in two. There she was, this woman I'd loved for over 2 decades, looking at me like I was a stranger, and all I could think was, why wasn't I enough? The moment I thought I'd heard it all, Jenny's tone shifted, cold and sharp as ice, like she'd rehearsed her next lines for weeks. You need to accept this, she said, her words clipped, as if she were laying out terms to a client, not her husband of 2 decades. I'm moving forward with John, and there's nothing you can do about it. You'll sign the divorce papers, or I'll see to it that you lose everything. I stared at her, feeling the ground slip beneath me. Everything? She meant it, our home, the savings, even my garage. The garage. My life's work, the place I poured myself into since I was a kid. She knew exactly what it meant to me, and she dangled it like a weapon. I could see it in her eyes, the way she relished my reaction. There was no warmth left, no hint of the woman I'd married. If you fight me on this, she continued, almost amused by my shock, I'll make sure my firm's lawyers bleed you dry. You'll be buried in legal fees so deep you won't even know which end is up. You'll be out on the street, watching them repossess that filthy shop of yours, piece by piece. Her words cut deeper than anything I'd ever felt. I had stood by her through everything, even put her through college when her own life had been in shambles. Now, she was twisting the knife, saying my life, my work, my sweat, my sacrifices, meant nothing. It was like she wanted to break me, not just take what we'd built, but destroy the foundation of my pride. And yet, the worst part was seeing her absolute detachment. This wasn't anger or bitterness, it was deliberate cruelty. She wanted to wipe away every trace of me from her life, even if it meant tearing down the garage I'd fought to build. My voice came out low, barely more than a whisper. You'd really take it all, just to hurt me? But she didn't flinch. You'll get what you deserve, she replied, calm and ruthless, and walked away, leaving me in the silence of a life she'd shattered. It wasn't long after Jenny's threats that her boss, John, showed up at my garage, striding in like he owned the place. He wore a slick designer suit, a smug little smirk tugging at his lips as he looked around, obviously unimpressed. With his briefcase in one hand and a self-satisfied air, he hardly glanced at me before launching into his speech, as though he was doing me a favor just by being there. So, Dave, let me make this simple, he said, barely concealing his disdain. Jenny and I are moving forward. You can accept this transition quietly, or I'll be forced to make things difficult. His voice dripped with arrogance, and he seemed to take some sick pleasure in watching me stand there in silence. I have a team of attorneys at my disposal who can tie you up in so much red tape, you won't even know which way's up. You'll lose that garage, every penny, and everything else you hold dear. That's what happens when you mess with someone like me. I felt the heat rise in my chest, my fists clenching at my sides as he went on. He actually called himself an alpha, boasting about how he'd taken Jenny and how she needed someone strong to handle her. He claimed I was just a stepping stone, a lesson she had outgrown. His words became a blur of threats and superiority, his voice grating on every nerve I had. All the anger and betrayal I'd felt over the past months bubbled to the surface, white-hot and unstoppable. And then something in me snapped. I took a step forward, watching as the arrogant gleam in his eyes flickered, then faded, replaced by confusion, and then fear. Before he could process what was happening, I drove my fist into his face, a satisfying crunch echoing through the garage. John stumbled backward, shock written across his bloodied face as he clutched his nose, his confident facade crumbling. You think you're an alpha? I said, my voice low and steady as I took another step toward him. He tried to stammer out a response, but I cut him off with a swift punch to his stomach, sending him collapsing to the floor, gasping for breath. His briefcase lay open, papers scattered across the concrete, worthless in this moment. He looked up at me from the floor, helpless and broken, his once cocky expression replaced by the raw, unmistakable fear of a man facing real strength for the first time in his life. His alpha posturing, his money, his suit, none of it meant a thing now. He was just another man on the ground, outmatched and realizing he'd picked a fight he wasn't built to win. "Here's a lesson for you," I told him, leaning down as he struggled to catch his breath. "Strength doesn't come from titles or money. It's what you do when you're pushed to the edge." He opened his mouth to protest, but before he could get a word out, I left him there, battered and humiliated, his illusions shattered as completely as his arrogance. Jenny found herself stranded, her polished life unraveling faster than she could grasp. She had driven to the city, desperate to find some kind of solace after everything crumbled. But her calls went unanswered. She tried reaching the kids, figuring they'd understand, maybe even forgive her. But Maria and James, her own children, ignored her messages. Hours ticked by as she sat alone, replaying voicemail after voicemail that no one returned. The silence was crushing, each minute a brutal reminder of what she'd thrown away. When her credit card was declined at a gas station, she realized she'd lost more than just a marriage. She had nothing, no money, no home, not even the man she'd sacrificed it all for. John wasn't answering either. She tried over and over, but his line went dead. With each ring, she felt the weight of her decisions pressing in, suffocating, as the reality sank in. John wasn't coming. No one was. As the sun began to set, a familiar beat-up van rolled down the road and slowed to a stop beside her. She looked up, stunned to see me step out, calm and collected. For the first time in years, I felt truly in control, while she looked like a shadow of the confident woman she'd once been. Her face was pale, her hands clutching a useless purse as though it might somehow save her. I took a deep breath and looked at her, letting the silence hang heavy between us. "So," I began, my voice steady, "how's that life you traded me for working out?" She started to speak, reaching for the same pleading look she used to get what she wanted from me, but this time it didn't work. I felt nothing but a strange calm as I watched her struggle to find the words. I just, she stammered, her voice wavering. But I didn't let her finish. "Here's how it's going to go," I said, my tone as even as steel. "You'll get the divorce papers done, and you won't see a dime of what I've worked for. No house, no garage, no bank accounts. You wanted freedom, Jenny? Well, now you have it." She looked at me with something that might have been regret or fear, but it was too late for either. I was done being the man she could control, the man she discarded the moment she thought she'd found something better. Her shoulders slumped, and she nodded, barely able to meet my gaze. The fight was gone, and all that was left was a hollow shell of the woman I'd once loved. I felt free, truly free for the first time since her betrayal, as I turned and walked back to my van. I didn't look back, and neither did she. Her life, her choices, were finally hers to bear alone. In the months following the divorce, life felt different, quieter, simpler, but somehow fuller. There was an emptiness where Jenny used to be, but it wasn't the aching hollow I'd feared. Instead, it felt more like space, a wide-open expanse where I could finally breathe again. The truth was, I didn't miss her. I missed what I thought we had, the life I'd worked to build for us both, and the woman I'd believed she was. But the memories of that life now felt like a different story, a different me, left behind with her choices and betrayals. When I walked into my garage each morning, I'd feel a small surge of pride. That place was mine, all mine. Every bolt and wrench, every wall and floorboard, I'd put it there myself, and I'd almost lost it to someone who saw it as nothing more than a pawn. But I still had it. And that garage, it reminded me that while she might have chipped away at my trust, my loyalty, even my heart, she'd never touched the core of who I was. Looking back, I couldn't even feel anger anymore. Jenny had shown me exactly who she was, and I was grateful to be free of her games, her cold, calculated charm that had fooled me for so long. I'd lost something, yes, but what I gained was worth so much more: peace, self-respect, a new beginning. I'd stay close to Maria and James, proud to see them growing up, making lives for themselves. And who knows, maybe someday I'd let someone new in. But for now, I was content, happy even, working in the garage, living simply, and being my own man. I'd discovered something powerful in that silence she'd left behind, my resilience. I was stronger than I'd realized, and I'd learned, maybe a little too late, that loyalty given to the wrong person can be a heavy price to pay. But here I was, on the other side of it, ready to live a life no longer tied to her or her betrayals. In the end, I knew one thing for certain: the future was mine to shape, and that thought, finally, felt like freedom.